Aloha, everyone. Welcome to the County of Kauai's webinar on the CARES Act grant. We're going to give it a couple of minutes and let everyone who wants to join, and then we'll get started. So we'll give it about 2 minutes, okay? Give it about 30 more seconds. I think we still probably have a few people filtering in. We'll get started. All right, let's go ahead and get started today. Aloha, everyone. Welcome. My name is Nicholas Corson. I am the project manager for the Kauai Emergency Management Agency. Together with the Office of Economic Development, I've helped launch this request for proposals. The purpose of today's webinar is to go over the request for proposals, just do a quick presentation, probably take somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes to run through it, and then leave ample time for questions. We probably will issue a pretty short addenda. A number of people have had the same questions. We think they had some good points, so we'll do that. But getting started, let's share the screen and see the application. Sorry, not the application. I want to look at the entire RFP. All right, here we go. So, sharing the RFP. So, cover page, and we have a table of content to help everyone navigate their way through here. So, as you all know, this was our ad in the newspaper. I'm sure everyone saw it. I'm not going to belabor it, except for if you're looking for a grant for small businesses, that program has not been launched. It will be handled by a third party on behalf of the County of Kauai. More details to come shortly. So process-wise, this money was part of the CARES Act, which made a lot of news. That's what did the PPP. That's what boosted the unemployment. So this is a specific portion of it. It was Section 5 of that act, and it gave money to state and local governments. So most of that money went to the state of Hawaii. City and county were eligible to get the money directly, but the neighbor islands had to get sub-grants from the state because the neighbor islands are all under 500,000 in population. So this money comes with a couple of strings, which we'll talk about in detail later, but in a nutshell, it's got to be spent by the end of the year, which means we are on an extremely expedited timetable. The reason that this RFP process is so short is to leave successful awardees with enough time to actually spend it. So we either had to make the process short, or had to make the process where you had the time to spend the money short. So we made the process itself short. Limits on consideration, we don't really have time to walk people back through stuff. So if they're incomplete, ambiguous, unfortunately, they will be rejected. Electronic submittal required. This is to make all the reporting easier on everyone. It's at grants@kauaiforward.com. You can sign electronically. You have to sign electronically. If you have the capability to do a digital signature, please feel free. But if you don't, if you want to do this on a real basic way, \S followed by your name, legally sufficient for us. It has to be the actual individual signing, but that is fine. So you'll also make our lives way easier if you put the proposal file name as something very similar to what you're proposing. So not just a string of gibberish because that's the way it was scanned, but actually, you know, if you're proposing something, maybe you're proposing suicide prevention, like if that could go into the file name, that's going to make sorting this out a lot easier for us. Same organization can put in more than one proposal. That could happen two different ways though. You may want to propose in entirely different sector areas. You may have a really wide focus. That's fine, but you cannot combine funding from different sector areas into one project. It has to be two distinct projects. Or for whatever reason, you may want to put in several sub projects within the same sector area. You could do that as one proposal, or you could break it up, your choice. If you do break it up, we're going to evaluate them separately and you would have to report on them separately. This is going to go through a typical County of Kauai grant selection process. Limited to no addenda. There will be at least one addenda, but yeah, in general, again, we are really focused on getting this money out in the community as fast as we can, and so we don't have a lot of, it's a truncated process. Expedited reporting requirements. This has been a circular theme that I keep coming back to, but if you look at what the feds and the state required of us, and we posted that stuff online so that you can see it, you can see the state handbook and what requirements are imposed on the County of Kauai, and you can, the federal stuff is all on the U.S. Treasury website. We have to turn around and report on the 10th of every month. And so in order to do that, we're going to need information from you folks on the 5th. And that is just an extremely fast turnaround, and we know it. So we just encourage you to carefully consider whether you can meet that reporting requirement. Insurance, we are not overtly asking for insurance. Depending on what you propose, we may evaluate whether that would call for insurance. That will be done on a case-by-case basis. You can, if you decide that you don't want to do it, please let us know and just withdraw the proposal. No hard feelings, but we'd rather know up front that you've changed your mind. That way we don't have to spend time on it. So that is some intro stuff. This next section, section 3, is nitty-gritty legal stuff. So we're starting off with guidance straight out of the Treasury about what it means to comply with the CARES Act, with Section 5 of the CARES Act. So it has to be a necessary expenditure incurred due to the public health emergency. There are two great pieces of guidance on this, and I cannot recommend enough to read them. One's guidance and the other one's an FAQ that was revised. Please read them. Necessary expenditure is a pretty broad term, but it's not unlimited. And so the more you can articulate a nexus between what you're looking to do and COVID-19, the more likely it is a necessary expenditure. We're not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th. The data, what that means basically is last summer, did the county put it in its budget? If not, you're good. If we did put it in the budget, you might even still be good if you're doing something significantly different than what you would have otherwise been doing. So it's not in and of itself a disqualifier if it was in the budget, but it'll warrant more discussion. That said, I would assume that most of the things people will be proposing were not in the county's budget that last fiscal year. And then were incurred during the period that begins on March 1st, 2020 and ends on December 30th, 2020. Again, this is super important. We need the costs to actually be incurred before the end of the year. That means the work for which you might be passing on invoices needs to have been done. You cannot have someone promise to do the work in January. It won't work. We could get the bill in January. That's probably acceptable, but they cannot do the actual work past this year. And that's a little different than the way government stuff usually works, where we can encumber the funds and you do have that time. To be clear, you do not have that time. You have to get the work done this year. And so here's just giant letters, underlined, exclamation mark, yellow, highlighting. You have to comply with the requirements of the CARES Act. And what makes this difficult, like so many other things in this unprecedented emergency, is it continues to evolve. So we don't know what the U.S. Department of Treasury may say next. There's the link where we'd be looking. You can look as well. Just know that the use of CARES Act fund is subject to audit. The last time the feds did a massive stimulus like this that I'm aware of was the 2008 TARP stimulus, and the inspector generals came back and got about $990 million. So it is something the federal government does, and should be aware of that. Compliance with federal law, including Uniform Guidance 2 CFR. That's the uniform circular on grants. You can find it online for those of you who do federal or do things with federal funds. I'm sure you're quite aware of all that. Compliance with Kauai County Code. We also have our own rules in the Kauai County Code about who can get money. Those are here. I won't belabor the point, but not everyone is going to be eligible under the Kauai County Code, so it's worth looking at that. There are some other general legal requirements with the state. So you need to be what's called Hawaii Compliance Express. You need to be compliant with that. It is, it's possible that you may not be. You may think you are, but if you're going to go for this grant, I would encourage you to check, because there's a delay right now. The state, like everyone else, is kind of slowed down. So please check ASAP. DCCA, Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, same thing. If you are a 501c3, proof of charitable registration with the Attorney General, we provided some extra information on how you can go about checking that in those 2 bullet points. Production of a previous audit. We have gotten a lot of questions about this, and we are going to issue an addenda and eliminate the requirement that you must have been audited within the last 3 years. We still are going to ask you if you were audited. We think that that plays into your fiscal responsibility section, but it is not a disqualifier in and of itself not to have been audited. So there will be an addenda putting that in writing. Contractual terms and conditions compliance with the grant agreement. So in section 6, we gave you a sample grant agreement, what we would require everyone to sign. It's worth reading. There are a ton of terms in there, more than we, the county, probably would have chosen to put in if it were up to us. But again, we're a subrecipient, and the people we are getting the money from told us, you'll put, these are all the conditions on you. So we are passing them on. Prohibited use of grant funds. I don't think many people would even put in for this sort of stuff, but had to throw it out there in the RFP so you'd know that we're not allowed to fund you with this. Damages covered by insurance, couldn't do that. If you're getting reimbursed under any other federal program, now that's the one that might actually happen because maybe you applied for some sort of other aid. For instance, if you already got PPP, do not put into us to cover payroll. That's going to be a duplication, that's not allowed. Reimbursement to donors, can't do that. Workforce bonuses other than hazard pay or overtime. Again, though, both would have to be connected to COVID. If you're otherwise doing something that's hazardous or you're otherwise incurring overtime, but it doesn't relate to COVID, it's not eligible. Severance pay is prohibited, legal settlements are prohibited, and this is just a catch-all because the U.S. Department of Treasury may in fact release more prohibitions. And then number two is just a lot of information that boils down to you can't use it for campaigns, lobbying, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to belabor it by reading it word for word, but that is what it's getting at. Evaluation criteria. This is the criteria we're going to use to figure out which proposals to fund. So they basically what they do is they track that stuff we talked about above, the legal requirements. So to reiterate, are there costs necessary expenditures that were or will be incurred due to the public health emergency? That is, so the more you can articulate that for us, the more you can paint the picture, draw the nexus, the more likely you are to get awarded, I think. I rephrase this to be a little bit more common sense. Did the county budget for any expense related to this project / event in the 2019-2020 fiscal year budget? And were or will the proposed costs be incurred during the period that begins on March 1st, 2020 and ends on December 30th, 2020? The reason were is in there is it's possible that you have costs from March 1st that we will reimburse you for. If you think that you may have costs like that, go ahead and articulate so in your proposal and your budget. We are looking to get this money into the community, and so that's not a negative at all that you may have had costs. That's just a really relevant fact. Please let us know. The next three bullet points are a reiteration of the requirements of our county code. And then the actual scoring criteria is broken into three areas. The first is organization capacity, the depth and breadth of experience in the performance of similar work, the level of integrity, reliability, and credibility that overall, you know, we're made aware of via your board of directors, via the credentials of your staff. You know, do you have an accountant on staff? That sort of thing. Whether your mission generally aligns with the proposed project, and you have a chance in the application to tell us what your mission is. Your current staff, and that would include contractors and subcontractors that you plan on doing business with. Your non-staff resources. So, you know, obviously one thing that this event has caused is a lot of teleworking. Do you have the resources to do that sort of thing? That'd be a great thing to articulate and let us know about. And that you generally have the resources to rapidly incur expenditures. Again, the timetables to spend these kinds of money are usually much larger. We're talking about a lot of money in a really short amount of time. And so you really want to demonstrate that you can actually realistically use the money that you're asking for in such a short time frame. Moving on, fiscal accountability, do you demonstrate the financial capability and sustainability that we're looking for? Did you submit an accurate and feasible budget? Do you have sources of revenue other than what you're asking for us for, which just goes to show that you probably can manage money? You know, if we get pitched two similar ideas, how reasonable are the expenses that you are proposing? Do you have prior experience specifically with government grants management? And then again, and it's a theme, can you generate the necessary monthly reports in that expedited manner we need so that we can report to the state? The proposal, so is it feasible and does it implement what we asked you to do, the sector area goals? Does it have clearly defined objectives? Do you have proof that the community at large supports you? Is your timeline reasonable? Did you give us a detailed description of the services or goods that you're proposing to do? How are you going to document that for us? Again, there's very much the potential that we'll be audited to make sure that the expenses that we're giving money for were eligible expenses. Documentation is king in that area. Do you clearly identify whom you're trying to serve or where you're trying to do it? And finally, is it of sufficient scale to be administratively efficient to implement? The County of Kauai also has limited resources. We don't have the resources to track, you know, 100 $10,000 grants. So we're looking for larger scale things that we can administratively do in this, again, very short time frame. So those are the criteria areas. Sector areas being solicited. This is one area at the end that you're welcome to put in questions. I probably am not the guy to answer them right now. We can get you answers later. But the sector areas are being run by individual grant managers. And so we may have to loop them in to properly answer your questions. But we are reserving the discretion to adjust the allocations factors if we need to. Administrative costs may not exceed 5% of the total grant amount. Now, keep in mind that administrative costs, if you need to hire a position to do some of this work, that's not necessarily an administrative cost. That could be a labor cost. So, carefully consider what that means. We may award less than the amount you're requesting. That wouldn't surprise me. We put such wide windows on what we would allow that, if everyone asks for a ton of money, we're probably not going to be able to give that out. If we give you, you need to be ready up front to, if we say, well, we can only give you half, to present us your an adjusted proposal that then scales it down, because we know we'll probably, if we offer you half, we're not going to get the full thing that you were proposing to do, but you need to be ready to do that on a fast time frame. So think about that kind of contingency. Again, this theme that we keep returning to, all expenditures must be necessary under the CARES Act. And here we run you through a whole list of things that could be considered necessary under the CARES Act. I, again, would also strongly encourage you to go look at that U.S. Department of Treasury guidance. That will give you a greater idea. If you propose job creation, then we give you some very specific things. I can tell you right now that this one item here about required equipment and tool costs for these employees not to exceed 5% of the total labor cost, that is going to be a rise to work specific requirement. We'll be taking that out of the other requirements because it's acknowledged that, for instance, in agriculture, the equipment and tool costs may exceed 5% of the total labor cost. That's understood. We will change that. So first sector area, meal delivery program to high-risk groups. Again, I'm not going to belabor this. I think it's pretty clear what we're getting at there. Nonprofit loss support. The examples we gave were childcare support, community services. So we're definitely looking for that, but it's, as noted here, not exclusive to that. If there's other nonprofits that need economic loss support, we encourage you to put in proposals. But we very much hope that nonprofits that help with childcare and those sorts of resources will put in. Mental health and domestic violence prevention. We note here some alarming statistics and trends that highlight the need for these services, and we very much hope that people can put in and help our community there. Agriculture for self-sustaining Kauai, same thing. I think this is very clearly worded, so I'm not going to read all that at you. Transforming tourism / economic diversification recovery support. Same thing here again. We note 34% unemployment rate in April, so definitely a great need for help in these areas. Nonprofit grants, rise to work. The one thing I would say is this: you will still see the 5% cap on equipment placed in here. We will change that via addenda. So that is it for the sector areas. Then we're moving to the sample grant agreement. The grant agreement will look something very much like this. There is a lot of legal terms in here. It's definitely worth looking over quite closely. It leads by telling you who the grant project manager is, because again, with all these different sector areas, we've parsed this work out to different portions of the county. So we want you to be very clear on who your contact with the county is. Then the actual grant amount, make that up close and center. The scope, what we're going to do is just refer back to what you told us the project was. So please be clear about it so that the grant agreement itself is clear. Payment of grant funds, the county's typical practice is to give 80% once we execute the agreement and you give us an invoice, and 20% upon completion and submission of the final reports that we require. I would imagine that we will follow that in almost every case, but if an individual circumstance arises, then we will deal with that there. Performance period. So again, to go back to the CARES Act 3 requirements, this is requirement number 3. Money has to be spent before December 30th. So it's in bold, there's some underlines in there, just trying to make that really, really clear to everyone. And then in typical county practice, even after the agreement is executed, we don't want anyone to begin working until we give them a written notice to proceed. Number 6, the handbook is posted on kauaiforward.com. That is the terms that the state has required the county to agree. The handbook is also attached as Exhibit 5 to the end of this sample agreement. Suspension of payments. If someone's not doing what they told us they do, we can suspend the contract. Modification of agreement. It takes both sides to agree in writing to modify it. Termination. This language simply tracks exactly what the state said to us. So yeah, it's identical. And then really that's true of the majority of the rest of this contract. Is what it does is it passes down the same thing that the state said was going to be on us. So the rest of it gets into very technical legal language, and I would rather leave time for your questions regarding the RFP itself and go over the legal terms. So with that, I will turn it over to Diana, and she can let me know what questions have come in.
Aloha. My name is Diana Singh. I'm our Business Innovation Coordinator for the Office of Economic Development. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We've had a number of questions come in. Some of you have received answers already through the chat feature and the Q&A feature, but we want to go over them as well live so that everyone can hear the answers. So Nick, I'm going to send you a set of questions that we've had so far. One of the first questions that we've had was about eligibility of 501c6s, 501c5s, and PTSAs. Can you talk to everybody about the eligibility?
Sure. The 501c's, as far as I'm concerned, are eligible. I don't actually know what the legal status of a PTA is, so I can certainly look that up and get back to people. I would direct your attention to the county code section. If you are a nonprofit, and you don't necessarily have to be a 501c3, though that's the way we most commonly look at it, but it's those criteria in the county code that is going to drive my interpretation of that.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned earlier and that we've received several questions about is the requirement for an audit. Some of the nonprofits have mentioned that they have questions about their eligibility related to the audit. Can you speak about that a little bit more?
Sure. To be clear, we will issue a written addenda that eliminates the requirement that you need to have been audited. We are still going to ask in the application whether you have been audited. It's relevant to an assessment of your ability to manage funds, because if you have been audited and we've seen a successful audit, that's a bit reassuring to us that you have that capacity. But it's not in and of itself a disqualifier. If you haven't, you are eligible. We will be issuing an addenda.
Okay, thank you. So one of the other questions we had was, are government entities qualified for funding? Are they eligible to apply?
Unfortunately not. The state of Hawaii, not as the state government, but as a geographic area, we received, I think, 1.25 billion. Somewhere in the high 300s of that went directly to the city and county, leaving the state with somewhere around 800, of which they gave the neighbor islands various subawards. So the state of Hawaii has the lion's share of this money, and so it's our feeling that there's sufficient resources for folks there, and for us, the grants are restricted to nonprofits.
One of the other questions that we had come in prior to this event was about guidance on page limits for when we're applying. Is there any limitation on character limits or page limits on the application?
You know, we thought about it. We opted not to add them. Here and there, I think we asked that you be brief, but we also know that what we're asking is complicated because we have to report to the state. And so we opted not to put an arbitrary limit on that. I hope we don't get, 1,000-page application. That'd be a little bit much, but no, take the space you need to give us the information that we're asking for from you.
Okay, great. One of the questions I saw come in from Kevin, thanks for the question. The final report is due on December 10th, but activities don't necessarily have to end until December 30th. How do we report on activities and expenditures during that period of time, December 11th to the 30th?
That is such a great question. And if you look at the handbook, the state handbook, they're the ones that impose that requirement on us. If we get further clarification, we will pass that down. I don't know. In terms of getting the money out, that was really the best we could do, was just mirror what the state had said. So we're going to have to develop that, I think, as we go along. But I don't have I wish I had a better answer for that.
Okay, thank you. I see a question from Helen. Helen asked if the COVID crisis resulted in a loss of funds from another source, can we apply for funds for this grant in order to replace those lost funds?
Yes. That does not sound like supplanting to me. So if I'm understanding that fact pattern, you can't supplant. But if the funds are in fact gone, if they've notified you, sorry, we can't fund that, then that's not supplanting as I understand it. So my answer to that would be yes. I will probably double check with some of my counterparts in the county to make sure that their understanding of supplanting is the same as mine.
Okay. We had a couple of questions about the mental health and domestic violence services. One of the questions was, does this include activities designated to raise awareness of issues related to mental health in order to reduce stigmas about accessing services?
Yes, and you'll see this in the U.S. Treasury's guidance again and again, provided that it ties to the CARES Act. So this is not a general funding thing. It is a quite specific funding thing. But that said, I think there's widespread acknowledgement that this crisis is causing a lot of mental health difficulties. And so I'm pretty sure that someone could craft an application in a way that tied those things together. But that would be the catch. So yeah, that's doable, but you'd have to make sure you look at that CARES Act stuff and say why you're hitting those bullet points.
And similar to that, there was a question about using the funds to apply towards training, such as suicide prevention training. So same answer generally? Okay. One of the questions we had come in, and you mentioned PPP and not doubling up on funding. One of the questions that had came in said, if PPP funds have been used to pay for a position, that they've now been expended, and now there's a chance that that position would result in a layoff due to lack of funding. Could this be included? And I think to clarify the question, it would not be simultaneously using the PPP funds and this.
Right, I understand that part. So that's not the problem. We otherwise, I think, said that we weren't necessarily going to allow. I think we'd have to answer that in writing. I need to look more closely at what we said about jobs to make sure that PPP aside, that you could use the funds for
that. This is a question that came in from Jeremy. He asked, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but if the county awards a nonprofit funding through this process, through this RFP process, and then The federal government then comes back and decides that those aren't permissible expenditures. Would the nonprofit have to pay back the funds?
Theoretically, yes. The grant agreement that will require people to sign would definitely obligate, it would create the legal obligation to do so, yes. And that just passes down. The feds impose that on the state imposed that on us, and we're imposing it down. So it has just trickled down from the top.
Okay. Alice had a question. Can we apply for things like live trainings, or is that too risky due to the uncertainty with social distancing and the health side of COVID-19? So
No.
would it be a risky expense to plan to use the funding for live trainings?
You could apply for it, but one of the questions does say, and how would you do this safely if we got another wave? So I think doing that, I think like the question says, it's a risky thing to do. You know, the Department of Health tells us that even as inter-island travel reopens, we can expect a case or more on Kauai, and certainly once mainland travel opens. And so, you know, I think if you're going to propose that, you should include your backup plan. You know, what will you do? And if you are going to propose live trainings, reassuring the county that you're going to follow guidelines for doing things safely. You know, I mean, right now, you know, gatherings of more than 10 are still discouraged. Certainly wearing masks everywhere is encouraged. Having Purell everywhere is encouraged. You know, so letting us know if you're going to propose something live, you know, understanding what you can and cannot do under the governor and mayor's proclamations, I think would be helpful to know. What's your backup plan? But you know, it's not in and of itself disqualified. If you've got a really good idea and you've got a way of articulating why it's safe, then I would encourage you to put in a proposal.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Another question we had, and I think this is probably important for everyone to understand, so I'm going to do this one next, is does the program need to help only Kauai, or is a statewide program also eligible?
It overwhelmingly needs to benefit the people of Kauai. I don't think that we begrudge somehow other people tangentially aided, but this money is meant for Kauai.
Looking through some of the new questions that have come in. One of the other questions from Jill was, is there a list of who's managing each grant sector that they would see, who would be managing and reviewing grants?
I am not 100% sure that list is 100% finalized. There is a list. I will inquire about what, I'm sure at some point it can be shared. I don't know if it can be shared today, but we can get that information out as soon as possible.
Okay. Helen asked, could you tell us a little bit more about the Rise to Work and how conservation organizations might use that?
Unfortunately, I cannot, but we can definitely write that down. That was one area I noted in the beginning, the individual scopes of work. I am going to have to defer to the people assigned to run them. So I wouldn't want to say something that's not helpful. So.
Okay, so I think this is an important opportunity too to share that if we're not able to answer your question live today, you can still send us your questions at grants@kauaiforward.com, and then whatever we're not able to answer live today or requires additional follow-up, we can get back to you that way.
Yep.
Okay, let's see what other questions we've had come in. Jill asked, if through this funding we are able to build future funding and programming to continue into 2021, is this acceptable?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I would go right back to the CARES Act. Is it a necessary expenditure to respond to this coronavirus event? Building future capacity is not responding to this current event. So if I understand correctly, no. I get the desire to, I think that's a laudable goal to build capacity. Certainly it sounds like we're going to be in this situation for a while. But if you look at the federal guidance, the FAQ, they specifically ask about current events and future events and say this money is for now, right now. So Unless I'm misunderstanding the purpose of that question, the answer is
One of the questions that came in prior to the event was um, in section F1B, it talks about projects that support the CURST recommendations. For everyone who doesn't know that acronym, it's the Kauai Economic Recovery Strategy Team, and those recommendations are available on kauaiforward.com. And they wanted to know, does it have to support just recommendations in one specific sector or any of the recommendations?
no. Any of the current recommendations as they fit assessors guidelines.
Another question we received prior to the recording was, will the reviewers have experience in each sector area? So will the team reviewing the proposals have experience in that sector area?
There will be a mix. There will certainly be people with experience in that area, but there may also be people who just have experience with grants generally.
Lucas gave us a question. Are C Corps eligible for grant funds?
I'm not a corporate lawyer, so, but my answer to that would be, unless you could look at the county code, and if a C corp somehow fits that definition of a not-for-profit organization, maybe. But what little I know, C corps usually are for profit, and so I doubt it. But check the Kauai County code and see whether you feel like you fit that description.
We had a question, is the 5% administrative cap a county requirement or a federal requirement? And they explained that their nonprofit requires a higher allowable administrative cost percentage in order to apply for funding.
It's a county requirement.
County, okay. Let me just scroll through the questions for a second to see which other ones have come in. Sarah has a question. What does the guidance on jobs say? My understanding is that there's an element of creating employment. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. As long as it's employment related to COVID, so you have to make that connection. But yeah, certainly creating jobs is something that we favor. There's specifically a question inquiring about whether or not this funding would go towards creating jobs in the application.
This is probably one that everyone's been wondering. What is the timeline in which grants will be approved and how will the funds be distributed in terms of timeline? I think you already mentioned an 80-20 percentage there. What does the timeline for that look like?
So I didn't open, I should have left my calendar open, but our plan is to have the RFP closes the 24th. We will get the responses out to the selection panels. They will meet the week of July 6th. We plan on doing notice of awards towards the end of that week. We will be trying to contract with all the successful awardees in the beginning of the week of the 13th, and then executing the contracts and the notice to proceed on the 16th of July, if all goes well. And pursuant per the grant agreement, 80% of the funds would be distributed once the notice to proceed is issued, plus an invoice. So we need some sort of written request for payment from the grantees. So that's another thing to kind of get ready on their end. And I believe then payment would actually happen on July 22nd. So if all goes well, July 22nd and 80% upfront.
One of the questions we had early on that I missed, so I apologize for that earlier, was is local agricultural infrastructure eligible? Specifically, they were asking about kalo farmers.
Yes, but you have to tie it into responding to the coronavirus. So if you can articulate why supporting local farms relates to the coronavirus, perhaps you've seen that there's massive disruptions to our food chain. The troubles that Young has made public. Then sure, but you have to articulate that.
Okay. Does the University of Hawaii count as a government agency or government entity? So I think essentially they're asking, could the University of Hawaii apply?
The University of Hawaii could not apply to the County of Kauai for these funds, no.
One more question. Can the grant replace volunteer labor that was lost due to social distancing rules? So instead, they would be paying a new staff member to do the work that volunteers would ordinarily have done.
I think that that's probably doable, but like that other question, I think I need to more carefully review what we said about job creation and get, we'll have to follow up with that answer.
And we had a question, I'm going to hopefully explain this properly. How would the redevelopment of the Kapa'a skate park be viewed as an acceptable use of the CARES Fund? This would employ significant local labor and materials, but not be an expense that was incurred between March to December 2020.
Well, then right off the bat,
good point. I should have caught that one earlier. Sorry about
yeah,
that.
it would. I mean, it has to be incurred between March and December, unless, of course, you know, the PPP, the federal government extended the amount of time that businesses have to expend that funds. There's a chance they could do that with these funds, and that'd be great. You know, more time to spend that would be a benefit to all of us, I think. But you know, in terms of being realistic about benefiting our community with this money, and I'm only one person in this, but I'm a safer rather than sorry kind of fellow. I do not want to see these funds taken back. I don't want to put any of you folks in a position where the county would be coming after you for the funds. So, you know, if it can't be spent in this time frame, this isn't the right funding source for that project.
Going back to the list of questions, we have one. Could the grant cover the cost of machinery to carry out conservation work that would otherwise have been done by volunteers?
That too is like that job question. I'm leaning towards yes, but with that, I need to review the documents to have a final answer on that.
Okay, so some of these questions will, if you are the person who asked these questions, can you please submit them again through grants@kauaiforward.com, and we can get back to you with more detailed answers on these later. Okay, let's go back to our list and see which ones I might be missing. Can activities related to Malama Aina and environmental work and trainings qualify due to the need to shift economy to less tourism dependent activities and provide other career options and pathways for our workers?
You can certainly put in for that, but I think that's a thoughtful question, whoever wrote that, and I think right there it shows an effort to connect it to that first CARES Act requirement. And I would just encourage you to bolster that as much as possible. You know, how does that need respond to this COVID disaster? And I hear what you've done so far, and if that's it, I would say put it in. But the more you can strengthen that, the better.
Is the county able to assist with facilitating speedy permitting and approvals for infrastructure-based projects?
No. At least not so far as I know right now, that and not through this process maybe. I mean, if you have that idea, reaching out directly to those department heads that do that sort of thing, on a case-by-case basis, they do have some latitude when it comes to state laws, because Governor Ige did suspend Chapter 46, and the mayor does have the power to waive individual laws, but those laws, they have to waive them. They're not all automatically waived. And so through this process, we don't have any of that set up. So that's not to say that it's impossible. That's just to say that this is not the venue by which to request that, and that if you have an idea along those lines, you would really need to contact those individual departments and see if they're able to help you with that. I think the mayor is open to that kind of idea, but yeah, it wouldn't be via this.
Okay. Um, sorry, let me scroll back down. Is there a cap on how much an organization can receive?
There's caps in the individual items in the sector areas. It's like each sector area says one description and then two, and it has caps. So there's caps in the sector areas, but since you could apply to different sector areas, your cap, I suppose, would be the aggregate cap on every sector area. So, but yeah, otherwise, no.
One of the questions that came in, and I think was answered somewhat in the chat already, was can these funds be used to equip students and teachers with devices for distance learning? Obviously, you would need to tie that to COVID, but are there restrictions on who would be applying for that and eligible to submit that grant?
As you noted, it has to be tied to COVID, though I think that's one of the easier things to tie to COVID with our schools shut down across the country. The need for that kind of tele stuff is almost obvious, but yeah, articulate it nevertheless. But going back, yeah, there a nonprofit would need to apply for this. So if a nonprofit that does that sort of thing wants to write a grant to say we want to give X amount of students that need this laptops or hotspots, that's great. We would love to see such an application. However, if you're an individual parent who feels like you need help, this isn't the right way of doing it. This is a grant writing process for organizations. Hopefully, some of those organizations will be in a position to do something like that because I think that'd be great for the community.
And related to that, just can you clarify, are public charter schools eligible for this funding?
I don't know enough about public charter schools to know what their legal classification is. Again, the Kauai County Code says who's eligible. Or later if they submit that question in writing, I'm sure I can figure it out and look it up what a public charter school's legal classification is. But yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
We'll have just to alert everyone to the time, we have about 10 more minutes. So we're going to take a few more questions. And then just as a reminder, as we mentioned before, if you do have additional questions, you can send them to grants@kauaiforward.com following this webinar. One of the next questions is, can a nonprofit use these funds to assist businesses in converting to an online e-commerce platform?
Yes, provided that you actually spell out why going on to an e-commerce platform is necessary due to COVID, i.e. social distancing is important. So yes, but don't take it for granted that we're going to understand why that's necessary. You have to spell that out for us.
Okay. Another question that just came in is, are infrastructure projects, so for example, community asset buildings, commercial kitchens, processing facilities, are they precluded or could they be eligible for this grant?
They're not precluded, but infrastructure is the hardest thing of all, I think, to do in a timely fashion. So the work and costs need to be incurred before the end of the year. We cannot authorize prepayments by and large, not for things like infrastructure. So yeah, if you can do it in that time frame, not precluded.
Okay. I think that we've gotten to most of the questions. If anyone listening, if I've missed your question, can you please submit it again quickly now? Otherwise, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share, Nick, with the group?
No, other than I see we had around 90 some people participate, and I'm excited to see that level of interest. I think the community could really use this help, and I'm really excited that we all have the opportunity to be a part of this. So yeah, thank you for your interest, and I look forward to seeing some good work going in the community.
And just a reminder for everyone here, a recording of this webinar will be available. So if you missed a section of it or you'd like to listen back for the details, The recording will be posted probably later today or tomorrow on kauaiforward.com/RFP. There you can also find the FAQs, the guidance and handbook that Nick mentioned, and the application and RFP as well. So if you do want to come back and listen to the recording again, it will be available. And if you have additional questions, you can email us at grants@kauaiforward.com.
All right, well, is that then?
I think so. I think we technically have 5 minutes. So if anything else comes in, we did have one more question coming in, and I think we know the answer to this, which was they were hoping to get more detailed information on the sectors. And so that's not necessarily part of what Nick is going to talk about today. Those additional questions, if you could email us, we can get back to you with more information. Thank you everyone for participating, and you know how to reach us if you have other questions.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Thanks.